involved on the forefront of responding to COVID-19 in their respective context. My name is Cito. I'm the program advisor for Conducive Space for Peace, the Danish-based organization that works on transforming the global peace building system to create agency of local peace building. Today, we are going to have a continuation of a conversation with a very amazing panel. And before I give them a chance to each introduce themselves, what we're going to first highlight is that we are part of a conversation with Direct and Humanity United, which together recently published a report on peace building and COVID-19. So if you are interested in looking more at that report, I will leave it in the link in the comment section, and you can check out some of the insights that we'll be discussing today. But without further ado, I'm going to maybe ask my friend Alhassan from Sierra Leone to introduce yourself briefly. Just say where you're from and what you do, and maybe tell us how is the day-to-day for you there.
Greetings to you all. I am Alhassan Sesay from Freetown, Sierra Leone. I'm the founder and president of the Sierra Leone School Green Club. It's an environmental organization that works with schools and communities around Sierra Leone. And I also doubles as the Western Area Coordinator for Sierra Leone Unite, which is a country chapter of Global Unite, a youth peace organization that works with youth in the area of peace building and non-violence. And for us today, we thank
I guess we have lost
God because
let's go back to say we kind of lost you there for a second, but you can continue. Hello, Alhassan, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, Chris.
Okay, so maybe you can finish your quick presentation, introduction, and then we're going to give the floor to Laura as well to introduce herself.
As I said, I'm the Western Area Coordinator of Sierra Leone Unite, a country chapter of Global Unite, a youth peace registered organization with the youth ministry. We are into non-violence and peace education in our different communities. Sierra Leone Unite is a chapter of Global Unite that is all over the world. Maybe you've heard about it. And so I'm the Western Area Coordinator for Sierra Leone Unite. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alhassan. And now let's hear from Laura. Laura, your sound is muted. If you can check it.
Hello, can you hear me?
Now we can hear you for sure.
Good afternoon for many of you, and good morning to other people in the audience. I'm Laura. I'm a Colombian Peacebuilder, an academic, and I'm the head of the mediation and mediation support team at CNEP, Center for Research and Popular Education Program for Peace. This is a Jesuit organization founded 45 years ago with the purpose of working for peace, to work with local communities in the strengthening of their capacity for peace. We also focus on mobilization for peace, denounce human rights violations. But my team and I, we advise, design, support, and accompany humanitarian dialogue between rural actors such as women, indigenous people, Afro-Colombians, peasants, and social leaders for non-violent content transformation and dispute resolutions of land, cultural differences, visions of the world, access to rural and natural resources, to name a few. And we also advise some of the communities in negotiations between the communities and the state in topics such as the reparation for the victims in the framework of the armed conflict, but also for the good governance and protection of the environment.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Laura, for sharing about the work that you do. And Alhassan, thank you as well for your work in Sierra Leone. Maybe to get started with this conversation, we always want to hear how has the pandemic affected you personally? Because this has been very overwhelming a period. But I wonder to what extent this has been affecting you at work or at home or as an individual, if you can share a little bit about that. If you're not maybe speaking, just turn off the microphone so we can hear from Laura. Maybe let's start with you for now.
For me?
Yeah.
Well, Chris, I'm privileged since I'm being able to work from home. So in this case, I don't have the same opportunities as the majority of Colombia. Many of them they work in the streets or they have formal jobs. We have 48 million inhabitants, and 9 million of them are victims. And for example, 54% of the economically active population they work under informality. So in this sense, they don't have many opportunities. But in particular, of course, this also affects me because, well, I work a lot with rural communities and I have to travel a lot. And of course, right now, I live in the capital, which is far from many of these communities. So right now, I'm not being able to travel. And it's even harder if you want to check human rights violations and try to help those communities. But well, of course, we have. I have some colleagues there that are trying to face this crisis, but it's still hard. And as you may know, mediation is a field that relies upon proximity and human relations. Therefore, well, the internet can help, but its effects in mediation is very limited. So it's hard because of that. There are many places in Colombia without a reliable connection, so it's not always easy to actually continue to work in that the way previous to this pandemic.
Thank you very much indeed for sharing those challenges that you are experiencing. And let's try to bring it as well, Alhassan, if you can hear us. Alhassan, you also share a little bit of how this pandemic has affected you personally, and maybe also about your work in a broader sense. What has been the impact of the pandemic to your work and to you as an individual?
Thank you, Christian. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, for us as a civil society organization, I think we are part of so many work that we are doing both in the city and the rural areas. And most especially for us as an environmental organization, as a peace organization, we work with schools in the area of environmental issues and peace issues. So this pandemic has brought so many downfall in what we are doing. I mean, downfall because we are not able to meet with schools again, and also we are not able to meet with the children that we work with. So as many in our network are actively engaged in speaking truth to persons, to power challenging, we are concerned about how emergency measures may be responded, in some contexts for further close peace for civil society. But as an organization, as this pandemic is disturbing us, we've learned that life is not important to what we are doing, which race, color, or social strata. And as an organization, also we've seen that all is worthless in a society without consumption, because we've seen that so many people are not traveling again, so able to meet with each
Alhassan, you're coming a little bit short.
And schools are already closed.
Yes, continue to hear you. Sure, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, Alhassan, we can hear you. You can finish your point.
I said most of the students were already engaged. Okay. I think I will stop here because I think I'm having bad network.
All right. All right, thank you so much, Alhassan, for sharing that. Indeed, there are so many challenges that have come along with this pandemic in peace building, and as I've heard from both you and Laura, that this has also affected traveling. As Laura has pointed out, mediation work is something that you do on a face-to-face, and sometimes that work is not otherwise possible to do in other conditions. You also pointed, Alhassan, that in your context where you work closely with students in schools, just been very difficult to carry out some of your activities. I also want to mention now that we were also meant to be joined by our friend Subindra from Nepal, but he's been experiencing internet and connectivity challenges, technical difficulties to join the call. But definitely, Subindra, we hope you can join us pretty soon, or you can just continue participating in this discussion through the comments section. Now, back to you, Alhassan. I want to just bring this point about what has been going on in West African countries that have been grappling with the Ebola pandemic. It's also very daunting right now to be dealing with a new crisis of the magnitude like Corona pandemic. So I wonder to what extent have people received or have people perceived this pandemic, and to what extent is the government responding or are local peacebuilders responding to the pandemic? Because I know it's a very vulnerable condition in which some of the countries that have come through Ebola are going through right now. Alhassan, can you hear us?
Can you repeat the question, please, Chris?
All right. So my question with the resilience that you see happening within your country right now. You know, Leone had also undergone a period of Ebola crisis. So thinking of how you have shown resilience during Ebola, what has been some mechanism in place right now to respond to the pandemic? To what extent are local peacebuilders involved?
Yes, we've gone through another serious pandemic, which was Ebola, and I believe the experience is already there in dealing with short pandemic. And I believe we've already got the experience, and that's what we are doing presently in the area of campaigning against no more cases, because only yesterday we recorded 11 cases. And so since we've got the past experience doing the Ebola, that's some of the experience we are using in teaching our children online, in make sure in ensuring that we discuss with our people, with our community people, in order to keep themselves safe. If you have
Sorry, again, we are having a little trouble with our friend Alhassan with internet, but let's maybe move to Laura. Laura, for you, the question is a little bit different, but looking at one of the findings that came from a report that we recently published between Peace Direct, Humanity United, and CSP, Conducive Space for Peace, one of the areas of...
Have anything to go out? Don't go.
Sorry, Alhassan, we kind of got problem with your connection, but let's just hear from Laura here what she's going to answer to this question of the finding of the report. It said that in context of already ongoing violence, the pandemic has increased or has exacerbated some forms of violence. So, and in this context, I want to hear from you in your Colombian context, to what extent do you see the pandemic as a driver of renewed violence, and what are some kind of responses that CNEP or other organizations have put in place? Because as we know, Colombia is going through a peace process, and that's something that has also been shaken, I can imagine, with this pandemic. Again, maybe try to unmute yourself. I think you've...
Yes, correct?
Yes.
Christian, I found the report very pertinent for the situation of Colombia, and regarding how this COVID crisis is exacerbating violence here in Colombia, I want to put into the table 3 categories. The first one is what we can call vulnerable people. So in this group, we have mothers, heads of the household, scholars, workers, women, inmates, and workers with a special service agreement or contract. well, the government is giving them some transfer and benefits that are not limited to money, but they are also facing other kinds of violence too. So, for example, in Bogota, many street dwellers have been rejected and displacement by neighbors who, without a glimpse of solidarity, appeal to alleged security issues. And this also happened to migrants from Venezuela. And many people didn't allow the district government to actually create and build shelters for them. So it was a horrible situation and also a violation of the human rights of many people and especially for both vulnerable people. And regarding women, well, as we know, they have been suffering from domestic violence all over the world and also in Colombia, where there have been an increase in the calls for help and in the denouncement of domestic violence for women. Last year, I read some number in Spain that the women asking for help because they have to dwell in quarantine with their aggressor increased by almost 20%. And here in Colombia, we are facing some similar numbers. Well, regarding the inmates, which is another extremely vulnerable group, they have suffered from decades of overcrowding prisoners. And for example, during the quarantine in March 22nd, they produced records in at least 7 important prisons of Colombia, which left 22 people dead in the most important prison of Colombia, which is La Modelo in Bogota. And they were asking for better conditions. But there were also accusations of an alleged attempt to escape, but many of them, they were only asking for better conditions. And another group of people that are also vulnerable are workers. And as I told you, 64% of the economically active population here in Colombia, they work under informality. So they don't have access to money right now. But also those who actually have a formal job, they are not immune from abusive practice during this crisis. For instance, in March, there were accusations to some corporations that more than 5,000 workers were forced to accept an unpaid leave, which is unfair situation. And of course, you also have health workers who are facing COVID without the right protection. And I'm going to tell you some personal story because my uncle, he's a medical doctor, and at the beginning of the crisis, he told me that he was receiving only one mask every week. So this is incredible. And well, in Colombia, as in many other countries, there are gaps between urban population and rural communities. And the rural communities, usually they don't have access to healthcare system, they don't have access to water, so they are also part of this vulnerable group of people who is facing the crisis even more. This is what I call the vulnerable people. There's another group of people that is also facing this crisis, which is the indigenous and some peasants and farmers of Colombia. Well, there are more than 181,000 families, indigenous families, on risk of getting infected by the virus since they don't have access to water, they don't have access to protective masks or to any biosecurity implements. They don't have access to healthcare systems, and they suffer also the armed conflict, as you point out in the question. And although there's a lot of ways that protects this group of people, the indigenous people, because they are a group of special protection under the Constitution, well, unfortunately, at least 300 of them have been evicted from their homes in Bogota a couple of weeks ago. I know, well, this is also a problem faced by migrants, especially those from Venezuela. You know that here in Colombia we have more than 1,800,000 migrants from Venezuela. And because of the coronavirus crisis, most well, most of them, they live in precarious conditions, and they are walking back and they are returning to Venezuela. 800,000 of them are returning to Venezuela. So this is a crisis also between countries.
Yeah, I can imagine. Maybe just bringing in as well Alhassan into this conversation, you've highlighted very important side effects and how this pandemic has affected Colombians, more generally the vulnerable groups. And I am very aware of last week we had a conversation with Cynthia, and she pointed to the fact that the Venezuelans who have been already in a very precarious humanitarian condition in Colombia are now having to return to their countries in this very volatile time. But let's hear as well from Alhassan. Do you think this pandemic, if continuing to spread, will have an impact on peace building in Sierra Leone? And maybe you can give an example from your work. To what extent do you see the pandemic becoming a problem to peace building if it continues to spread in your context?
Yes, Christian, because, can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yes, it's true because one about management, and so most of these issues are affecting, especially most of us in global south. I would say this categorically because let's say in a single compound, you have more than 10 people that are living in this single compound, and they are only using a single toilet. Now tell me, what do you expect people to live? So like this is what we are always asking our government or officials to make sure that when they say they are going to lock down, at least these simple amenities. And I want to tell you, Chris, that this pandemic has revealed some lapses in our countries all over the world. I will mention one. Medical facilities in the global south, especially in Africa, is very disturbing. Only a single country is a country like only have one ventilator or two ventilators. It's only because of this pandemic that we have more than one or two. So I will say yes, it will. And also, one thing again that I will say here is people are very poor to the extent they live on a daily basis. They have to go to the market to sell tomato. They have to go to the market to sell cassava before they get their daily bread. So I will say this pandemic, if it continues the way it's going this way, it will affect what we are doing. It will affect. We are not infected, but we are affected one way or the other all over the world, and especially in the global south. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Alhassan, for sharing that. I think you've pointed to the fact that it's already impeding lives because people who survive on a day-to-day basis cannot basically go to the market, cannot basically find food for the day. And I think that's already a problem in itself. Please, if you may want to mute yourself for now, Alhassan, we're receiving some. Okay, I've already done, so don't worry. Now, moving forward, I want to hear as well from Subindra, who is chatting in the comments section. And Subindra from Nepal says that lockdown has started in Nepal since March 24th. And like other developing countries, we're also facing problems. The lockdown took place without considering local realities, but doing what China or other countries did. So we were kind of confused for a week for our roles, but now our colleagues in the districts are working as connectors between governments and communities, raising awareness about COVID-19 in their community, and they are trusted and also working with local governments in developing mechanisms to distribute relief materials to ensure that it reaches all, including the marginalized communities. So at the moment, Subindra says, we see a number of problems. The first one he mentions is there is a lack of coordination among the government agencies. Poor and vulnerable are more affected. Now, maybe let's pick that comment from Subindra and bring the conversation to Laura, if you can comment on coordination. What efforts do you see happening already on the ground? And in terms of coordination, how are different local organizations and peace-building organizations, most importantly in the Colombian context, coordinating efforts to respond to the pandemic?
No.
Again, if you can. Sorry.
I have learned. Well, but before I answer that, I want to just say two things about the peace agreement, because in Colombia we have signed a peace agreement in 2016, and well, there are many victims that are right now not receiving the reparation from this for the armed conflict, and there are, well, since the peace agreement, there have been systematically assassination of social leaders, and during this crisis, they are also facing this problematic, because at least 8 of them, actually yesterday, there was an assassination of a social leader from the west part of the country. And also the exclusions, they are part of the reincorporation system, and during the quarantine, 13 of them suffer from displacement, forced displacement. 14 of them, which is an important number.
Yeah.
Well, regarding that, I think that there are many efforts coming from the government, the national government, the governments in the municipalities, the mayors. I think they are trying to respond to this crisis, but somehow this is bigger to all of us. And of course, this is also the results of all the systematically and historical gaps between people. So now we are facing and we are trying to respond to that. And in this sense, I think that civil society organizations such as TINEP, but many of humanitarian organizations or Peacebuilders, and many people from civil society, we are all trying to respond to this by solidarity. That's like the first step we are doing right now. We are trying to take some of the money of the project, but trying to work with donors in order to actually face the situation in the municipalities and with the local communities or at the local level. And for example, we are trying to mix this humanitarian aid in the framework of the crisis with the work we do in mediation. So, for example, we are trying that women from both parties, from indigenous and from peasants who are usually opposed, that they try to give this aid to the communities by showing unity and solidarity. So we are trying to mix this, and I think that many civil society organizations are doing an extremely important job through solidarity, and try to connect them with the mission of them in society.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much indeed for sharing on that, and it's glad to hear that there's a lot of coordination efforts that are happening, as you've pointed, even more in the context of Colombia, where the peace agreement has also been fragilized with this peace, with the pandemic. I think it's just really important to note that moving forward, the country will need more coordinated efforts to fill in those gaps that the pandemic has caused in terms of the implementation of the peace process. Now, moving into another kind of direction, I want to highlight a few points that were brought into the consultation that we had recently with our 3 organizations, Peace Direct, Humanity United, and Conducive Space for Peace, in terms of the role of international actors and international funding organizations in the peace building process. So what it was said actually is that peace building international NGOs and other intermediaries between funders and local peace builders have a particular role to play in staying connected to local peace builders in this moment, ensuring support to their work at this critical time, and advocating for sustained funding to local peace building. Now, I want to ask, in your context, Alhassan, if you can comment on this, what kind of funding support has been given to the work that you're doing? What kind of international actors are involved in the work that you're doing? And to what extent do you feel supported, really, in responding to COVID-19 in your context? Alhassan, can you hear us? All right. So I don't know if I can repeat the question, but the question I was going to ask you is, in your context, if you can comment, who have been the international actors who are bringing support in terms of funding, and what kind of international support do you receive to do the work of responding to COVID-19? Yes, we can hear you. Mhm. Thank you for sharing that. Maybe also picking up on that, maybe Laura, if you have any comment to add.
Yes, a brief comment. Well, I think the international networks are key in this moment. Well, these kind of actions are really important to actually try to connect each other as human beings. But also, for example, in the NGO I work, we want to make visible all the human rights violations. And in that sense, the international actors are fundamental to replicate this information. And also, for example, right now we are supporting the ceasefire declared by one of the groups in Colombia, which is the ELN, the National Liberation Army. And in this regard, for example, the UN has been very helpful in trying to connect every people from every country that are supporting different ceasefires. I don't know, in Cameroon or in Colombia, for example, are some of the examples. So I think that this time is the time for solidarity between all of us. And so in that sense, I think that international networks are key in this moment.
Indeed. Thank you so much for highlighting the solidarity that is needed in this time, and for showing indeed that in your context, international organizations like the UN, Alhassan, you've also pointed to the fact that the IMF and the European Union have invested resources in response to COVID-19, but yet it's a matter of how are these resources allocated. And one of the comments that was raised in our former conversation was that international organizations need to pay attention to not cause harm, because sometimes when in times of crisis, investment in terms of resources and funding sometimes lands in people who are not necessarily the ones who are the most affected. And sometimes this may cause problems where the people who are the most needing this support do not necessarily get the support that they need. And maybe to just continue on this conversation, I want to hear as well from Subindra, who says in his context in Nepal, if the pandemic continues to linger, some of the problems will be caused. One of which he says people and government are expecting to work as humanitarian organization. Donor funding might change for COVID-19. So that's one thing is interesting to note, that in his context, at least, if the pandemic continues, then most of the funding will be directed to donor funding. And I think, sorry, to COVID funding. And I think that's also been a tension that the report that was recently published highlighted, that the more we think about the extension or the continuation of the spread of the pandemic, more resources might be diverted to COVID-19 and not to local peace building. And this is one thing that we have proposed, that it's very important that we focus as well on local peace building, because as we've pointed out, Laura and Alhassan, there are so many other issues related to directly to peace building that need also to be paid attention to. I wonder if you can comment to that, Laura, briefly. Do you think in your context funding is being diverted away, and if there's any message you can give to international actors or to donor institutions that are watching this conversation, what message would you give to them, those who are inclined to move away from local peace building? Again, if you can unmute yourself.
That's one of our concerns right now. That of course we understand how big this crisis is, but for example, in the framework of the armed conflict, more people have been killed than or compared to all the people that is dead right now because of the COVID crisis. So I think we have to pay attention to both, because somehow, well, the intersectionality, the approach, because this COVID is, I think, is affecting most these vulnerable people that are already suffering in the armed conflict, and in that reason, or in that sense, I think we cannot only address our aid through humanitarian aid, but also to trying to continue to working with local communities to try to do a peace building in a bottom up way, and to giving them all the tools, because they already have many. I think that they have knowledge, they have everything, but somehow they don't have the same opportunities that other people, for example, here in Colombia, other people that live in urban areas or that live in the city. So somehow I think that we have to try to connect both ends. Otherwise, this crisis is going to be worse for those that are already in vulnerable places.
Mm-hmm. And maybe also picking up on that comment from Laura, if we can hear from Alhassan, what do you think is going to be the impact of restricted or limited funding to local peace building in this time in your context? And what advice would you give then to international actors or international organizations that are maybe reluctant on funding local peace building in this moment? Can you hear me, Alhassan? I'm not sure if you heard me. Well, as Alhassan is trying to deal with a connection, and we're sorry for that, because this has been also a persistent problem for most of our participants. But let me hear from comments on the call and the chat section. Thank you to all our online viewers who are joining us, and those who are already commenting and sharing comments and contributing to this conversation. Thank you to Berekia Blessing. Thank you to Muhammad Ramahan, who is calling us from Nepal. Thanks as well to Subindra, who has been resilient to this stress with participation through commenting. Now we are really approaching the very, very final segment of this call. And in this segment, we would like just to offer a moment to reflect on what messages that you would give to those who in this moment as well are affected by the pandemic because they've lost their loved ones, or because they're sick, or because they're unemployed. As we know, many people have, as you pointed out earlier, have lost their jobs or are really living in a very precarious condition. If you have any message of solidarity to them as well, what would that be? Starting with Laura for now. Yes.
Well, I think that I want to say again solidarity. I think that if somehow he or my organization can contribute to lower all the suffering right now, well, you can count on us. And I think that, well, I'm speechless, because I think this is overwhelming. This is a challenging situation, and I think the only way to go through it is with the humanity we all have, and with empathy. You know, many people, for example, here in Colombia, they are saying that people is not doing quarantine because they don't like, but it is actually because they cannot. And many of those are the ones that are dying. So they have to face this dilemma, or whether they die because of the COVID or they die because of starvation. So, my message to many people, and especially to those who are suffering, is that I think there are also many people who are supporting, who are willing to do whatever it takes, because this is time for solidarity and for empathy to the humanity. So that's it.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Laura, for that point. You're pointing to solidarity and humanity. And I think this is also a message we've been echoing every session, that as Conducive Space for Peace, as Peace Direct, as Humanity United, we stand in solidarity and empathy with all those that have lost their loved ones, or all those that are living in the time of very difficult condition where they just don't see so much of hope. And it's really hard, it's really disheartening, and we want really to share our words of comfort. Alhassan, if you have any very last remark as well, I want to hear from you, a word of comfort or a word of solidarity with those who are facing a very hard pain with this pandemic. Can you hear us, Alhassan? Sorry. If you are not able to hear us, Alhassan, we've lost you again. But thank you so much, everyone. Thanks again, Laura, for your time this morning, for sharing. This is really very informative. And thanks for your work, sending also empathy and solidarity with you in this time, and with everyone that you're connected to in your work in Colombia. Thanks as well to all our online viewers. Thank you, Joseph Songo, who says he would have loved to participate in this conversation, but unfortunately, he's also having problems with megabytes. As we know, many people really have to buy credits to be able to connect in this kind of dialogue. So we really understand, and we support you, and we send solidarity with you. Thanks, everyone, joining us online. And I hope you've learned and enjoyed this conversation. Join us again next Saturday at 3 p.m. as we continue the conversation on how local peace builders are responding to COVID-19. Take care, and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.